MultiGreen, building attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily real estate through impact investing.
Welcome to the MultiGreen podcast. I'm your host, Randy Norton, and today we'll be speaking with Dennis Shea, the Executive Director of the J. Ronald Terwilliger Center, part of the Bipartisan Policy Center. During our time together on location in Washington, D.C., we discussed how the United States affordable housing shortage is the Terwilliger Center's primary focus, and how bipartisan support for legislation and regulatory reform supports housing development. Enjoy our conversation. Dennis, thank you for being with us today on the MultiGreen podcast.
Great to be here, Randy. Welcome to D.C.
I love this city. We're here this week. I guess some of the news, the sad passing of Mr. Dole, and you have a connection with him.
Yes, well, first of all, Bob Dole is the co-founder of the organization where I work at now, the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington. But many years ago, I started as a 27-year-old attorney being asked by Bob Lighthizer, who became the USTR, who I previously worked for Bob Dole, came into my office when I was at the law firm and said, "Do you want to work for Senator Dole?" And I said, "Of course. Where do I sign up?" So I got the job, and I was basically working in the Capitol in the Republican leader's office for a number of years, sort of in the cockpit of Senate politics, because his office was right outside the Senate floor. So all kinds of people were moving through there, and it was really, for a political junkie like me at the time, it was just an amazing experience. And it was an amazing experience to work with Senator Dole, who is such a fine, upstanding patriot, American, and person. And you've read all the great statements that people are making about his passing, so they're very well deserved.
And to his credit, Senator Dole was also a big part of this initiative that you're a part of.
Yeah, he I think about 15 years ago, in his post-Senate career, post-politics career, he joined forces with three other Senate majority leaders, Howard Baker on the Republican side, and Tom Daschle and George Mitchell on the Democratic side. And they formed the Bipartisan Policy Center, which is a think tank, a place designed to be a place where people from both parties can come together, hash out issues, and try to forge paths forward, and try to find solutions for some of our nation's most pressing problems. And so, he was one of the founders of this organization.
And today we're here to talk about housing.
Right.
I think that's one of your identified initiatives at the Policy Center. And even more specifically, you have a new initiative within the center.
Right, exactly. We have founded a center within the center. We have founded the J. Ronald Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy. It's the result of a very generous philanthropic donation by Ron Terwilliger, who was in his business career the CEO of Trammell Crow Residential, and built a lot of multifamily buildings, homes throughout the country during his close to 30-year tenure at Trammell Crow. But he's been a tremendous philanthropist in the housing field. He has done work with Enterprise Community Partners. He chairs the board. He has worked given support to the Urban Land Institute. So he, and most importantly, Habitat for Humanity.
Yes.
He's a major donor to Habitat for Humanity. So I've worked with Ron in the past. I worked with him on a project at ULI. I worked with him at a foundation several years ago that I worked with him on housing issues. And when he said, "I'm going to, support the BPC and establish this housing center," I said, "I'm with you, Ron, and let's get to work."
Love that backstory. And what was the mandate from this $10 million? Is there a specific initiative, research, policy, or advocacy that your center is going to do versus ULI, for example, or some of his other initiatives?
Okay, let me just kind of go a little bit on the background on the BPC. I mean, Ron chose the BPC because it has a 10-year record initiating housing policy, developing bipartisan housing policy. There was something called the Housing Commission 10 years ago, which was chaired by George Mitchell and Henry Cisneros, former HUD Secretary Mel Martinez, and Kit Bond, who was a Republican senator from Missouri. And Ron was part of that. And we issued and I was part of it as a consultant, and we issued a major report, Housing America's Future, which looked at rental housing, home ownership, housing finance reform, the aging population, what housing challenges that posed. And it was a very well received report in the housing community, because it was a broad brush but specific blueprint for how to get us out of the financial crisis and get housing going again. So BPC has this, great track record, but it's also, we're action oriented. So we have a 501c4 that is directed at advocacy before policymakers in Washington, Congress, the executive branch, so that we sort of distinguish ourselves from some of the other think tanks.
Got it.
And the other thing is, we're totally bipartisan. So I feel we do, when we go see Republicans, go see Democrats, they will say, we're coming from a decent place, we're coming from a good place, and we command respect from both sides of the aisle. So that's why Ron, I think, chose the BPC as the place to put his housing center. But we're not, right now, what's the future? We just got launched. We believe very strongly that housing is fundamental, that it's in America's profound self-interest, both economically and socially, that all of our families, all of our households are stably and affordably housed. And that's the mission, because housing is not just about shelter, it's also about other outcomes, better health, improved academic performance. If you're living in a stable, affordable home, children are likely to perform better at school. And if the home is located in a decent community, a community with some opportunities, and that also is very, very important. So we think housing is foundational, fundamental. We want to get that message out. But we have a problem today, and that's affordability. And I know we see that as having two primary dimensions. One is the supply side. No, Randy, you're big in that's your focus. Mm-hmm. We just have this immense shortage of affordable homes, both for rent and for sale in the United States. And that has translated, when you have an imbalance between supply and demand, that translates into higher housing costs, particularly for the lower income households, lower income Americans. So we're really focused on supply. That's going to be our major focus of the center as we head into the new year, to focus on the supply, to talk to policymakers about it in various ways, and then and try to raise that issue more profoundly in Congress. But there's also the demand side. There are resources available for housing assistance. We support the voucher program. We feel it's helped people prevented them from being homeless and provided some opportunity for people. Unfortunately, only 1 in 5 households eligible for the program can avail themselves of the program, because there's just not enough resources. And vouchers are often allocated by lottery in many jurisdictions. So it's a supply-demand imbalance. We're going to focus on both, but starting out, we're going to really hit the supply side problem really hard.
You're probably the only organization in the world focusing on the supply side of housing, aren't you?
Well, I think there are, I wouldn't say that. I would
I'm
like
not
to
aware
say
of
that.
any.
There are, I think the issue is becoming more prevalent. The Realtors, National Association of Realtors, for example, recently commissioned a report that said that we had underbuilt housing over the past 20 years from 5.5 million units to 6.8 million units, underbuilt. So we're in this big supply hole. So we need to build more, and try to make it, really work to make it affordable to workforce families, to lower income families, because that's the goal. Everybody in this country should be living in It doesn't have to be the Taj Mahal, but it should be a decent, affordable home.
So the Terwilliger Center is trying to achieve policy change on the supply and demand side, but you're starting with supply.
Yeah, I mean, our focus is going to be starting with supply, and they're basically, we do not support, the reconciliation process because it's a partisan process, which has a lot of resources in housing. But if you look at some of those resources in housing, some of those ideas embedded in the reconciliation bill, some of those ideas have very strong bipartisan support. For example, expansion of the low-income housing tax credit is supported by Republicans. It was a venture between George Mitchell and John Danforth, the Republican senator from Missouri, back in 1986. The idea is there's a proposal called the Neighborhood Homes Improvement Act, which basically is like LIHTC, like the housing credit, but to support, provide a tax subsidies for developers who build homes in distressed communities for lower income, first time, homeowners. That has Republican support. That idea, the idea of cutting back regulations that delay and add costs to building, is an idea that very much resonates with Republicans. I mean, Jack Kemp, the HUD secretary in George H.W. Bush's administration, had a whole initiative on removing regulations that impede development and act as exclusionary forces for lower income folks. So there's a lot of bipartisan agreement, a lot of opportunity to find bipartisan agreement on the supply side issues. And on the demand side, I mean, there are Republicans who support targeted vouchers for lower income families with children, with very young children, to get them to be able to move into neighborhoods that offer more opportunity, but targeted at those families who are with the young kids, because there's been research that shows when those kids move to a better neighborhood and have access to a better schools, they're going to have better academic performance over time. This is the Raj Chetty, Harvard professor, did this research. Better academic performance, make more money, more income, contribute more tax revenue. So, I mean, the message I want to deliver here is there's a lot of bipartisanship around housing. We just got to harness it and make some changes in this country.
So we're in a housing crisis now. I guess historically we have been, and it continues to get worse or better.
Well, I think, I mentioned this Housing Commission report from 2011 to 2013, and that report is loaded with words like urgent, crisis. This is 2011. Unsustainable. My judgment, it's worse today than it was back then. I mean, the housing affordability problem is not just a coastal problem or a big city problem. It's a problem affecting communities across the country. I saw some statistics where the home prices in Boise and places like Boise and Austin and Phoenix have really gone up. And that's good if you own. But if you don't own, you're trying to get into the market for the first time, it's very difficult, as you know.
We're trying to enter Phoenix now. We've identified over 50 sites, and many of them will not allow for density or even that NIMBYism aspect is a very real front and center issue where we can't get the zoning or permitting across the finish line, and city councils are not approving projects. So sometimes it's not even a federal issue here. It's a local municipality issue. Are you doing anything to bridge the divide there?
Well, that's a great point, because we hear that a lot. That's these local and primarily a lot of local rules, minimum lot requirements, density prohibitions, parking requirements that just make it impossible to build. There is legislation that would provide grants it's part of the reconciliation bill. Grants to states, competitive grants that to localities that actually are working to remove those barriers. So we're going to shine a big spotlight on that problem, because we hear that problem a lot. That's been a problem that's been around for quite some time. And the question is, from a federal standpoint, do you do the carrot by providing incentives for change, to do a stick by conditioning federal funds, on certain changes a locality has to make. I mean, I think the most people say that the carrot is the better approach, but we're going to really kind of uplift those communities that are doing the right thing and that are knocking down these regulations and showcasing how they can have housing that's affordable to lower income households. We're going to really try to shine a spotlight on those efforts.
Thought just came to me. Developers sometimes are incentivized, from an organizational standpoint. We're always trying to get tax credits or tax incentives all the way through our 1065, our 1120s, 1041s, 1040. Is there things that we can do at the city level to incentivize municipalities to advance this work forward?
Well, obviously putting pressure on local officials. I mean, it would be an important tool. Do it in the right way. This is such a city and locally driven issue. You have to get the policymakers in these localities to buy into this idea that having more inclusive housing, having a range of housing types that meets the broad needs of your community is the right way to go, and it's good for the community. So we're going to showcase, as we move forward, we're going to look at those communities that are doing that sort of work and uplift them and shine a positive spotlight on that.
I understand you're doing some supply side work now, and you've got a workshop coming up, or you're launching one in the near future.
We're going to have a series of at least 6 webinars beginning in next week. It will be our initial one, and then we're going to have it over the next 6 months, where we're going to focus on, the first one will be the general problem. Well, let's put out the numbers. What is the scope of the problem?
I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, what's the on the for sale side and on the rental side? What is the scope of the problem? Let's get a base of understanding, and then going forward, looking at various aspects of the supply issue, the regulatory problems, the difficulty, the complexity of financing to try to make these projects pencil for lower income families. We're going to look at that issue. We'll look at supply chain issues. We're going cost of lumber. I hear that a lot as a major problem, and other inputs, the cost of other inputs in housing construction. So we're going to look at all the factors associated with housing supply, both on the for sale side and on the rental side, and try to create a comprehensive picture and assessment, and then see what we can do.
It's multidisciplinary. It's a multi-issue. The housing market is in the crosshairs of everything, including supply chain,
right,
materials, labor, and now even energy costs, and that cost burden is rising. Are you guys looking at the energy solutions for resident communities?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at the issue of housing affordability. So yes, we will be looking at the energy side. And when you figure whether housing is affordable, the federal threshold is 30% of your income on housing and utilities. So, energy costs, utility costs are a major factor in housing affordability. So yes, of course, we're going to look at that. And we look forward, I know you work a lot in that space, so we'd love to hear more about what you're doing in that area.
Many say real estate is all about location, location, location. For the last 20 years, I've been saying it's about demographics, demographics, demographics. I also know that this is a very complex issue in housing. Can you opine on any of that?
Sure, I totally agree with you that if you want to understand the housing situation today and going forward, you have to look at the demographic changes that are occurring in the United States. So the number of Hispanic households is going to rise dramatically over the next 10 or 20 years. They are traditionally have lower wealth than white households. So that could be more of a pressure on rental demand. So, and also could exacerbate the wealth gap between white and Hispanic and African American households. So I think rental demand will likely be strong because of this transformation of the ethnic and racial composition of the United States. But at the same time, the country is also becoming much older. We're aging. The percentage of the population that's 65 or above is growing significantly. And many Americans want to, as they age, age in place, meaning in their own homes. I think of my mother who basically passed away at 95, and she was in the home I grew up in New York City till the very end. But was that home suitable for a 95-year-old? Probably not. And I think most homes, and suitability means, is it one level? Does it have the wide hallways, easy access to things within the home? I mean, suitability for an aging population is very, very important. Suitability of housing. So I think that's going to be another major issue going forward. And the BPC has actually done a lot of great work on that subject of aging and housing.
I look forward to reading more of it.
Sure.
We're dealing with demographic trends on our side, on the resident consumption side, on the labor force side. There's not enough labor. And of course, the people that are working in the municipalities, all of that expertise that has been gained over the last 20 or 30 years, they're retiring. This is a very complicated issue that you're tackling here at the center.
It sure is. And, do we have the skilled workforce to build homes? And that's another very, very important issue.
Well, I see you working it from the top down. Is there anything you'd like us as a community working from the bottom up? What would you tell us? How can we make a difference?
Well, I think I would hope you stay plugged into the work of the Terwilliger Center and the BPC going forward. If you have ideas that you think or areas that you think we should be focused on, please let us know. I think you understand what the mission of the center is. I think just get the word out that we really need to, and I think you're doing it already, Randy, really need to increase the supply of housing, particularly housing affordable to moderate income and lower income households. I mean, that really get that message out hard. And I think you're doing it through this podcast and in your other work.
Well, thank you for being with us today.
Sure.
We end every podcast with one question.
Okay.
This year's theme is on attainability. So by definition or by preference or any other way you want to describe it, what does attainability mean to you?
In housing?
It could be housing. It's any way to look at it because, people will dissect affordability, attainability, and other things around this, industry that we're in. But we're specifically trying to talk about more attainable, aspects of this industry. So is there anything that is unique to the word attainability when you think about that word?
When I think of attainability with respect to housing, I think housing that is attainable housing would be housing that is affordable to a family, that they can live comfortably and have access to opportunities without stressing their budget. It doesn't have to be some incredible spread, but it just needs to be a good, decent home in a decent community which they can afford without breaking the family budget. That would be attainable housing to me.
I like the definition. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure. My pleasure, Randy. Great to be here.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you for listening. Join us as we build 40,000 attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily homes by 2030. And if you like the content you're hearing, hit the subscribe button. Follow us at Think MultiGreen and sign up to learn more at www.multi.green.